Hi, this is Kevin McDougall, one of the 8th grade American History Social Studies teachers at Laramie Middle School. This video is going to provide an overview of secondary source documents, which is a part of our Unit 1 module on primary and secondary sources. So, secondary sources, in general, are sources that were created after a historical event has passed by someone who did not directly experience that event. There are multiple types of secondary sources that we're going to cover now, and you will explore further in this module. The first major type of secondary source that we will look at is a textbook, which you have all encountered at some point, I'm sure. We have them in our classrooms. But textbooks are a prime example of a secondary source because they are created by multiple authors, usually, who were maybe experts on history or historical events that we're covering. So, therefore, they weren't or directly involved in those events. Instead, they take a bunch of resources and put them together for you to kind of understand in a very simple sense in a comprehensive textbook. Another type of secondary source that is pretty common is a website. You might go to websites like history.com if you do an internet search on a historical topic. Those are typically secondary sources because they're created by people who did not directly experience them, but again, are experts on the topic. They take a bunch of sources together and make them more presentable and readable to the audience. Another form of a secondary source might be a biography. A biography is not to be confused with an autobiography, which is a story by that particular person about themselves. A biography instead is written about someone by someone else. So it could be like if I wrote a story about the life of George Washington. I didn't know him, therefore I'm not a primary source. I'm just taking a bunch of resources and piecing together a story about that person's life. Another type of example that we'll see are book reports or maybe oral reports you give in front of a class. So we can use that as an example. If you do research on, let's say, the Battle of Gettysburg, you weren't there, you did not directly experience it, you collected a bunch of information and put it together in the form of a report. This does not mean that these secondary sources are not valuable. They can be, and they are, because they take a bunch of sources that are trustworthy and valid, and they kind of tell you a whole story versus a primary source, but might be more particular. So they definitely have value, but secondary sources do differ from primary in that they were created by someone who was not directly involved in the event after the event has passed. Now, this particular part of this module is going to go through these various types of secondary sources that we just went over. So what I want you to do is go ahead and click the next button on the bottom right part of the screen to explore more about our most common form of secondary source, which are textbooks.